I'm Neville Lubke. My family came to this property, Bonnie Rise, at Gindra in 1967, which is kind of ironic because my forebears several generations ago actually farmed in the Gindra area in the late 1800s and subsequently moved to Walla Walla, where I was born and bred on a property leased by my father. Being unable to purchase that property in the late 60s, we found this one and settled on it, and it will next year be 50 years since we signed the document that said it was ours, and the bank's as well. At that stage there were 6 properties between here and Albury. If you take the trip now and do that same route, which is approximately 12 kilometres, there are probably 60 properties. Thus is the result of higher land values and, I think, indiscriminate subdivision. But it's altered the landscape forever, and we can't go back, we can't restore a lot of that landscape to what it originally was. But this little parcel of land that Jan, my wife, and I are privileged to own, we have spent a lot of time trying to restore it to grassy box woodland, which is what it was in its natural state. Ideal habitat for many ground-dwelling birds and little critters, many of which have been lost over the years. That restoration, I suppose, has taken us probably 30,000 trees and bushes over a period since the late 80s. Our biggest one-year planting was 3,000 trees. But if you take a photograph out of the album that was snapped in probably the mid-70s and compared it to what you see now, you wouldn't recognise the same property. We're quite proud of what we've done, but the acid proof of whether you've been successful or not is the amount of species that we've attracted to this property since that time. Our bird list now racks up, I think, 142 or 143 species of birds, which are my special interest. When we first came here, you might have got probably 50 at best. So we're pretty proud of that fact, that the environment has changed to the better. One of our great concerns, though, is the subdivision of land. It's pretty much subdivided up to the boundary of our property, and ultimately, with high prices and the cost of rates, I don't actually know what the future of this little stretch will be. But I think it'll see Jan and myself out, being in the mid-60s now, and we'll do our level best to ensure that the environment here is protected as long as we possibly can. In 1857, 5 generations back, Christian Lubke came from what was then Prussia to Adelaide, Port of Adelaide, and subsequently moved from Adelaide to Mount Gambier and selected property there. To the best of my knowledge, the country that he took up was poor, and they struggled, as you can appreciate, clearing the land, probably land that wasn't very fertile, not much money, everything was hard. So their sights then went further afield, and the hunger was for farming land. Where they came from, they were farmers, and they wanted to continue farming. So the move to the east was on in quite a big way. Lots of other people of similar origin were moving to New South Wales, towards New South Wales. So with a little family, young family, he moved, and the records show that they then took up property at Gindra, which is not far from here, a little bit to the southwest, and farmed that for a period of years. They must have had itchy feet or itchy something, because they then moved to Piney Range, Walla Wallbundry area, once again more property, and then moved from there one more time. They, I think, only had a small family, which is a little bit out of character at that time. But the next generation certainly were benefits of better times and We saw larger families as well, and once again the farming thing continued. My grandfather, coming down through that line, was able to take up farming land at Walla Walla, selected it in a ballot, or won it in a ballot. Under the Robinson Land Act, many big properties were split up. Walla Park Station was one of those, and many parcels of 300 odd acres were put up for ballot, and the reason for the ballot was there was more demand than there was land. So the ballot system ensured that those particular winners were the privileged few that were able to take up property. So my grandfather was one. His brother actually got the block next door, which was a sheer fluke, but they did well. Tragically, he died in the mid-30s from appendicitis, which now, appendicitis, no big deal, but then they didn't know what to do. So the appendix actually burst, and he tragically passed away with a family, my father being 6, his brother 3, and his one and only sister, a little baby in mum's arms. So that Walla property, which was subsequently to be in that line of the family for the next 100 years, had a very bitter start. But his widow was determined to hang on, and although they had considerable debt and tough times, she farmed that land, and my father helped then when he left school. And I'm proud of the fact that they were able to hang on to it for 100+ years. It was only actually sold in the last 12 months. My grandfather, Bush Lubke, was very fortunate in winning a block in the land ballot of the breakup of Walla Park Station. The reason for the ballot, I believe, was there was more demand for properties than there was properties, so the ballot was the only fair way that they could somehow distribute the limited amount that was there. Tragically, Bush Lubke died in his mid-30s from appendicitis. Something now we don't even think twice about. Into the operating theatre, done and dusted, but then they never knew what to do, and the appendix burst, and he died. The property was continued on by his widow and the children, which were my father, who at the time of Gus's death was only 6 years old, his brother being 3 and sister a little baby. They hung on to that farm, and it kept going in that family line of Dad's brother, who inherited that block for 100 years. The Lubke family property that Bush Lubke selected was ultimately named Ardenvale, and the old photographs that we've got some record of show that in the early days machinery was fairly labour intensive. All the grain was lumped by manpower. Crops were sown and harvested by horse teams. And it's interesting because my father, who was only ever a half-hearted farmer, and he was there because he had to be there, and his heart's desire really was to be a mechanic, but he hated horses with a vengeance. So they were one of the first people in the Walla Walla area, the area where the farm is, to actually purchase a tractor. And I still have a record, a photographic record of that tractor, and it still exists in a shed in the little town of Walla Walla, and it still goes. So we think that's pretty smart. But when you line what they did up and how they did it with the machinery of today, we'll look at some of the gear that Jan and my family have. With auto steer, they can actually watch TV while they harvest a crop, and bulk handling of grain, and just a massive change in 2 generations virtually. So my father saw change from lumping bags, doing everything the hard way, changing from horses to a tractor, which is a really big deal. In my lifetime, I saw the change from handling all sorts of grain, from single bags to bulk handling. And now the next generation see the next step in that in the olden, not the olden days, cut that bit out. When I was younger, if you harvested probably 30 or 40 tonnes in a day, that was a big day. Now, if you don't harvest 30 or 40 tonnes in an hour, you're not trying. So just a massive change, and a massive change in technology, and who knows what the next couple of generations will see. Life on the land always has its challenges, and for us, probably droughts, fires and floods are the three biggies, and we've experienced all of those in some shape or form in our nearly 50 years on this particular block. The biggest fire event in my lifetime here was the northern end of Tabletop Mountain, which was lit initially by a lightning strike and very nearly put out by a couple of chappies with two knapsacks. Tragically, they ran out of water and the fire got away. For the next 2 weeks, we fought that fire in all sorts of shapes and forms, and ultimately a fire break was put around that end of the range, back burnt, and the remaining area inside the perimeter was torched. It was the only way we could get it out, but it was an absolute shocker. Being particularly rough country, there would have been significant loss of wildlife, I would imagine, but loss to assets and livestock and so on was non-existent, being in tremendously rough country. But in more recent times, our oldest son experienced a rather devastating fire which originated in Walla Walla and burnt to Gerodgery, in which several homes were burnt. We lost, I think, probably 100 odd sheep, and other people lost various amounts of livestock. It was a lot bigger. The fact that nobody died that day was remarkable. One particular person was very badly burnt, but several homes lost, a lot of livestock, a lot of pasture, and a lot of heartache. As long as I can remember, I've always been passionate about flora and fauna. And I think that love goes back to my grandfather on my mum's side. He was a fairly tough, hard man, but one thing he had a soft spot for was the wildlife on his property, and particularly the bird life. Nobody shot ducks on his dams. So that came down the line through my mum, who was madly passionate about chooks and turkeys and ducks and all sorts of things, to Nev. In one of my fondest memories, and believe it or not, I would have been, I think, 4 years of age. I was certainly not going to primary school yet. We had a Chev 4 ute, which was a OH&S nightmare. It had no doors. We'd fed cattle, and there was a beautiful stand of Blakely's red gum on the property we leased that supported a pair of Bush Stone Curlews. I was only a little tacker, I didn't know what they were. And we'd fed the cattle. I was sitting next to Mum, and she pulled up, put the Chev 4 out of gear and said, she called me Nevy, she said, "Look there, Nevy." And here were two curlews doing their usual camouflage thing, flat on the ground. And that memory is still solid in my mind 60 years later. So I think that was the beginning. I think it's partly genetic, but perhaps it isn't. But certainly, the older I got, the more passionate I think one has become over the flora and fauna we're privileged to live in among.
I'm Jan Lubke. I first became involved with Bush Stone Curlews when I married Nev, and he showed me the wild birds we had down the paddock, which we all took for granted then. And they were down there for a number of years and had chicks, and they were just part of the environment. And we didn't worry about them much at all. They were just there. It wasn't till the early 2000 where we got asked by a wildlife photographer who wanted to take a photo of curlews, and we said, "Not a problem, we've got them at home, come and have a look." So he came out and we found we only had one bird. We didn't have a pair and we didn't have chicks, and that wasn't what we expected. So we asked around neighbours and they all had the same story. "Oh, we used to have them, but now you mention it, we haven't heard them for a while," and we realised they were dying out. So we wondered, could we do something about it? So we had this wild idea to start a Bush Stone Curlew breeding program. And That was probably about 2004 we started that. It wasn't something normally private individuals did, it was only government authorities did that sort of thing. So it wasn't really encouraged, and there was all sorts of difficulties in starting it up. But we persevered, and Nev always said if I was a dog I'd be a fox terrier because I keep on nipping at people's heels. And that was the start of the program, and since then it's gone on from strength to strength, and here he comes now. This is the curlew chick coming across just now. What are you doing, chickie? Come here. Chickie, chickie, come on. This curlew here has been one that was an incubator hand-reared bird. He was a rescue job. The Bush Stone Curlew is a fairly iconic bird for this area. It used to be here in big mobs in grassy boxwood land, but a lot of their habitat now has been cleared, particularly in this area with the subdivision. So they're becoming extremely rare. I guess they're an elusive, secretive bird. A lot of people don't even know they're out there. They hide, they're nocturnal, they hide during the day in day roosts of timber and people don't see them. So you mentioned curlews and they don't know. Like, we were under threat of the Hume Highway bypass through here, and they sent a team of ecologists in to look what was out in the landscape, and they never found the curlews. They were there, but they didn't see them. They didn't even know they were there, and they're actually an endangered bird in New South Wales. So when the people working on the bypass found out that we did have curlews here, it actually moved the path of the road because the original path went through where the curlews lived. So I suppose for us the curlews are special in that Nev's grown up with them all his life. They, I guess, are a part of who he is, and when we came here they were a part of this environment too, so we just want to protect them and see them remain here for our grandchildren to see. We've been working on the project now for about 14 years, and I guess we're personally winding down, but hopefully there are others picking up the project as well. There's a lot of zoos and fauna parks coming on board and contributing curlews to release programs. The whole project has snowballed. We've released curlews in 3 states now, totalling 148 birds, and we'll have probably another 9 or 10 to release this year. But there'll be other people we hope will carry on the program. We'll always have some curlews. We can't imagine life without some curlews, and we'll contribute by doing our bit in habitat and also with what we've learnt of these birds over the years. So we're sort of, I guess, becoming more knowledge brokers than curlew brokers, and hopefully someone else will continue on breeding the birds, and the zoos and fauna parks will keep on doing the good work they're doing. I've always said the farm is my garden. I don't have much of a garden myself, but the whole farm is my garden, and I guess I love the farm. I couldn't live in town. Before I got married I worked as a veterinary nurse, so I was always been involved with the animals. I'll always come up with the idea that we can do another tree block here on Nev Groans. We're normally planting between 1,000 to 2,000 trees a year. I just love the environment and the farm, and to get outside, it's good for your soul, close to nature. Yeah, don't take me out of the land. Another benefit of being out in the country is the community and the people you get around us. It has changed over the years. Like years ago when there wasn't a lot of us around, it was probably a lot tighter knit community. But you get out a bit further, it still exists. I know we had a lot of support after the Gerodgery bushfires, and I can remember being out there the next day and we were going through all the sheep as to which ones I felt I could fix up and which ones needed to be put down. And the guys came around bringing sandwiches for lunch, and one fellow we know really well, he arrived with the sandwiches, and I'm told by Nev I did look quite a sight, but he provided us with sandwiches and he saw me and he burst into tears. And there was a New South Wales farmers' Christmas dinner that night, happened just before Christmas, and they wanted us to come, and I said, oh, I don't know, we're pretty stuffed, I don't think we'll go. But we decided, well, we better go. So it was being held at Gindra pub. we arrived a bit late by the time we got cleaned up. We went into the pub and there was a big table with everyone sitting out there for Christmas dinner, and they all stood up and clapped as Nev and I walked in the door. Well, that was just about enough to dissolve you into tears. We weren't allowed to pay for our meal. They were just glad that we were all right and we were there. So that was heartwarming when you compare it to my sister that lives in Sydney, and the person next door doesn't really know what she's experiencing in her life and in her house just across the fence. So yeah, I don't think you'd want to swap where you lived, really.
Living close to the Hume Weir isn't all water skiing and fishing. An interesting little aside from that was in the 2002 drought, our oldest son and a young chappie who owned property next to the what should have been Hume Weir water were running sheep on the Weir flats. They'd let the sheep go in the morning, in the evening, out with the motorbikes, muster up the sheep again, because as you can imagine, thousands of acres of Weir country now with nothing on it, no fences, no way to keep the stock in. One day whilst out on their little motorbike excursion, they saw a piece of metal sticking out of the ground. Two young fellows, quite inquisitive, they dug it up and thought it sort of looks a little bit like a miniature missile perhaps. Put it on the back of the motorbike, took it back to the home base, made a couple of phone calls. Ultimately we had the police and we had the army disposal chappies there, and it was unexploded ordnance that apparently there is quite a bit of in the bed of the Hume Weir. So I'm pretty lucky that it didn't just go off when they were handling it, but put another slant on the Hume Weir flats. We're standing in amongst a beautiful remnant stand of eucalypts, which, if we wound the clock back some years, supported a pair of Bush Stone Curlews, and I have actually seen Bush Stone Curlews with young in this stand. This is what we call a day roost. The curlew, being a nocturnal bird, seeks a safe position during the day so it can safely roost without the worry of an aerial predator. Forgetting about the introduced predators, which are another issue again, naturally their number one predator from years gone by, before any introductions, would have been hawks and eagles and such. So you can imagine a bird standing in here, half asleep, doesn't matter. It's very difficult for a low-flying jet like a peregrine falcon or whatever to manoeuvre through here and take out a Bush Stone Curlew. So these sites are very important. After the safety of the day roost, when night time comes and it gets nice and dark, the birds will emerge from the day roost, walk out, fly out, who knows where, to a adjacent country that's a little bit more open and has a good population of insect life, which is basically the curlew's diet.